Thank you for joining us back here on Just Conspiracy, where we just wish to conspire to bring heaven down to earth. I thought it might be a good time, since we're kind of in the middle of the story, to tell you what I personally think, believe, why I think and believe some of these things, and where I'm trying to go, where I believe people should try and get to, because people have yearned for freedom since the beginning of time. And people have sought out a savior figure across every single culture known to mankind on this small little blue pebble floating through a big, dark, infinite void called the universe. And so, what brings me to my conclusions about our particular society, I'm speaking specifically of America, is because we have a history of people and cultures that would not accept slavery, that would not accept 100% authoritarian rule from a government. And so I look at all of time as kind of this flowing back and forth, good versus evil. Sometimes good's on top. People who have the spirit of the Creator, the spirit of the one true sovereign, sometimes they're on top, like Moses. Moses was on top when he walked his people out of Egypt. Before he walked his people out of Egypt, for a long time, Pharaoh was on top. Pharaoh probably wasn't real godly. He was probably a lot more worldly. Did not wish to give up his power, his authority over the slaves. And the story encompasses a lot about slavery, because back when the Old Testament was, I've heard people talk about how immoral the Bible is because in the Old Testament it accepted slavery. Let me tell you something. If your society, if your culture did not perform some sort of slavery, it didn't exist very long. Because another society, another culture that had a whole lot of slaves would have more people to fight wars and conquer your non-slaving society with. And then that society would become slaves. Like it, don't like it, I don't care. Facts of history. Facts are hard to argue with. Till these days. Not going to get into that. Anyways, since the time of Christ, because a lot of people look at Christ as their savior figure, I agree with that symbolically. Christ is the savior who came down and taught people how to treat each other so that they could save themselves from each other. This is why Christian communities gather together and they deal with people within their own community, because they know people in the outside world, like every Amish child knows that the English people, they the bad ones. Every culture has their bad guys, and every culture has their myths. But Christ in the Bible, I've talked about this a lot, he is by far the best common law judge I've ever seen. Moses brought the law down from the top of the mountain, and in my mind, Christ gave us judicial review on how that law was to be applied. But if you look around our society, it's not really being applied. And I look at the struggle that people have for freedom. I feel like the Creator of all things, the universal Creator, has always been on our side, because there's no more of a perfect setup to give people the ability and the right to choose how they wish to be governed and how they wish to live than what's going on right here in America today. Now, the reason I believe that not that many people see it is because it's not that clear. And they have mainstream media and corporate advertisers telling them that the only way they're going to get change, the only way they'll see a difference is by voting. You got to vote for it. You can't complain about it if you didn't vote on them. But of course, I've already talked on this channel about how I feel about voting. I personally cannot choose the lesser of the two evils. Not in this society. Now, I'm glad and I hope that the general populace chooses the lesser of the two evils. I hope we get back on track. I would love to see a day where I felt like voting again. I would love to see that day come. But until then, I feel like I have to try and do what I can do to make a difference, and that's going to court and trying to make sure that rights and freedoms are upheld at court. Because in a civil society, that's the only place that rights and freedoms are upheld, is inside of a courtroom. If it's not upheld inside of a courtroom, you don't live in a civil society, and it's probably going to get violent. That's the way history usually goes. So, since the death of Christ, this little island, the island of Britain, has had different people on it, different cultures. And it was under Roman rule because it was bread and butter for silver and other raw materials until the Roman Empire collapsed. And then the people on the British Isles started following their own form of law, a very natural form of law called common law. And in 1066, William the Conqueror conquered London, therefore claiming the island of Britain. Now, it wasn't real easy. He tried imposing a civil law, and all of the people who were already well established on the island, they weren't going for it. There was a lot of fighting back and forth about who had the authority to make what kind of judgments. And then in 1215, you have the Magna Carta. And what the Magna Carta introduced is it introduced a numerated document that had people's rights attached and numerated on that document. And the other thing that was numerated in that document was the idea of a grand jury. Was the idea that the people of the land, through law, could indict the king. King John didn't like that so much, so he went back on the Magna Carta and said it didn't apply. He was under duress when he signed it. He absolutely was. A bunch of barons put a sword to his throat because they said, hey, we got rights, or you're not going to be worried about our rights because you'll be dead. Absolutely under duress. After he went back on the contract of the Magna Carta, the barons got together, laid siege to his castle until he died from dysentery. Think about that for a minute. They laid siege so well to that castle, the servants were not even willing to throw the crap, the feces, over the castle wall for fear that they would die from arrows. Every king after that said, Magna Carta is good law. In fact, multiple kings had it read every third Sunday at a church. The church that people of the town got together and went to. And the law that these people came under was common law. Common meaning land, each and every individual. Common means land, that's why they have the commons. And common also means like every common man or woman. And then law, the law that applies to the commons, to the common people. The law of very simple right and wrong. Natural law, very easy to understand. Because all it has to do with is this right in nature or is it wrong in nature? Which is why we have the right to know the nature of the wrong and the cause of the accusation whenever we are accused of a crime. Anything that could hold prison time. This law was so in force and so well observed that around 1650, I don't remember the exact date, but in England, they killed the king legally from a lawful court holding judgment over him. Take that, sovereign immunity. And nobody probably had more rights than an Englishman, I don't care what color he was, right around the time of the Revolutionary War. Because throughout history, the people on the British island fought for their rights. After the Magna Carta, they made Parliament the first legislative body in Europe since the time of Rome. And Parliament, their legislatures, from their inception all the way up till shortly after the American Revolutionary War, basically all they did was make statutes securing and expanding the rights of man and mankind. That's why they had probably the freest society. But what they did, instead of having slavery in their society, they exported it. They exported it to America. They exported it to other British islands and holdings. They exported it through the East India Tea Company. So even though the people on the British Isles were free, Britain held a whole lot of land all around the world where they weren't so lucky. And this kind of brings us to America, because we still had slavery in America at the time of the Revolutionary War. And even though America freed slaves, supposedly, in 1865, 68, somewhere around there, we did the same thing that Britain did. We exported slaves. We went from forced slavery to slave wages. It's a big problem. People recognize it today. It gets people to donate to funds, making sure that 12-year-old girls aren't knitting our shirts in Siberia or something like that. I don't know. But we exported our slavery because, especially a capitalistic market, cannot exist with slavery, because there would be nothing to capitalize on if there was no slavery. If every man, if every woman got paid their worth and their due, there would be nothing to capitalize on. And America, coming from a country that had the most expansive rights known throughout the modern history of man, creates a federal government and states that start chipping away at the rights of man. I didn't realize how much. In fact, I was always of the belief that taking away the law for the average individual really didn't happen until after the Civil War. But I've been listening to Lysander Spooner, and he wrote a book about an essay on a trial by jury back in 1850. And it talks about a lot of the same problems that I see in our modern day legal system. Except for he was speaking at it at the beginning, and I'm looking at it at the tail end where all of those rights are gone. The things that he is talking about our society losing, we have already lost, and it's gotten well past that. Well past it. So it's a really, really interesting view. And I believe that America was created by a sovereign force, by a spiritual force, behind the scenes with a hidden hand, to give us, the people, a choice to choose the law of the Creator, or to choose to try and find a Savior in a man or in a woman, an elected official, and have them save us, but really we're giving them the keys to enslave us. It's already happened. I look at all of this stuff that's going on in courts as spiritual in nature. This is why I talk about governmental worship, worship of the mind, govern, order to things, mental, of the mind. Creating an order for people's minds. And what people really got to focus on, in my mind, is they got to focus on the courts. They got to focus on the right and wrong of things. Because if we don't uphold law for our brother and our sister, how are we going to be assured the law will be upheld for us? And this is the choice that I believe people have to make. Because, in my opinion, the only way us, as the American people, get through what's coming up, and we all know something severe is coming up. The only way we do it, in a good way, in a positive way, is by coming together, working with each other, and making sure rights and justice and law is upheld in a courtroom. Because if we could have rights, justice, and law upheld in a courtroom, we could build a better society. If we could make sure everybody gets held accountable equally, cops get held accountable for what they do, criminals get held accountable for what they do, judges get held accountable for what they do, politicians get held accountable for what they do, lobbyists get held accountable for what they do, and it's a really confusing matrix and system of networks. And not everybody is an evil conspirator. Most people are just trying to make a living and get by. But if we don't weed out the bad actors, if we don't find out the bad actors and start punishing some of them in some kind of meaningful way, then we will never have rights. And if we can do that, if we can start looking and finding the bad actors and punishing them and holding them accountable in a meaningful way, then I think it would be a great deterrent to future government officials not to act that way. And let me be really, really clear. I don't believe in overthrow of the government. With the state of national security and the threat of national dangers, I think that would be silly. I believe we have a pretty good system of government, but we have to get it back to the basics where the common man, the common woman can understand. And we have to get to a point where we, as the people of the society, do not allow them to execute unlawful orders and judgments from the court unless we understand the right and the wrong of it. And I don't think that's too much to ask. And the reason why that's so important is because if we don't understand the right and the wrong of what the government is doing, if we leave it to some bureaucratic professionals, that has never worked out well throughout history. But on top of that, how will you know they're doing the right thing if you don't just know it in your heart to be the right thing? It's just a question I have to leave with. And so my basic belief is that people are going to come together and they're going to start getting their rights upheld in a courtroom and start executing lawful judgments against wrongdoers, or people are going to keep following the party line. They're going to keep buying in to the nonsense that they don't buy because they have a couple of talking points that they do. And it's your choice. It's your world. But I just couldn't see coming to the end of my world and walking up to the pearly gates and not being able to truthfully say, hey brother, hey dad, hey father, hey sister, I did everything I could possibly do. Any nonviolent option I had open to my disposal, I took it, even to my death. Can I please get on the other side of that gate? Because they're crazy down there, and they're even worse about 6.6 miles beyond that. That's just me. A lot of things that I do in life, it's not because it's helpful or comfortable to me in life. It's just because I wish to be able to live with myself after I'm dead. I know that can be confusing, but October 18th, 11:30 a.m., I have court down at the Greenville County Courthouse in South Carolina. If anybody wishes to just randomly show up, I would appreciate it. We also have this case going on at the federal court. We're talking about Oracle and Baba, how Oracle got abducted and arrested just so that they could put the facts they wanted on the record and steal everything that Baba has made in his life from him. After that, we were talking about me and Baba. We were about 4.5 years ago. Henry and I got arrested just because Henry was standing up and saying, "That's not my attorney at court," because that's such a crime. And people got to get interested in this story, because the next part of the story I'm going to talk about is what Henry and I did afterwards, who we notified, who we contacted, what we tried to do. And after that, I'm going to get into the federal lawsuit. But without people understanding the background of this story, they're never going to understand the words and the evidence that the suitors are claiming against bad government actors. And if they don't understand those things, then they're probably not going to understand why the government actors are acting badly and what they can do to try and stop them. And then after that, we're going to write the appeal together right here on YouTube. So stay tuned. I'm still trying to get monetized, so please like, share, subscribe, get as many people interested as you can get interested, trying to make this into a soap opera for y'all, because we are just conspiracy, and we just wish to conspire to bring heaven down to earth. One world, love, and peace.